I think my time in the United States obviously made me appreciate the important role of the United States in protecting its peace and stability of the world, uh, and uh, and I view that alliance with the United States as particularly important. I can also say that I think one of my main goals would be to speak with my friend of 40 years, President Biden, and I'm going to tell him that I think that there is a need for a reaffirmation of America's commitment to its traditional allies in the Middle East. Israel, of course, is there. We've had a solid, unbreakable relationship. But I think that the alliance, the traditional alliance with Saudi Arabia and other countries, has to be reaffirmed. There should not be uh, periodic swings or even wild swings in this relationship, because I think that the alliance between America's allies and with America is the anchor of stability in our region. And I think it requires periodic reaffirmation. And I hope to speak to President Biden about it. Well, first of all, I disagree with the premise of your questions. I didn't hand them over great powers in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank. Not at all. In fact, all the decisions will be made by me and the defense minister, and that's actually in the coalition agreement. So there's a lot of misinformation about that. I think my record speaks for itself. The last decade in which I led Israel was the safest decade in Israel's history. But not only safe and secure for Israelis, also safe and secure for the Palestinians, because there's been the least loss of life on both sides. And that's not accidental. It's because of a responsible a policy of security that I've led, which has actually resulted in more peace, growing of economic possibilities, and so on. And by the way, in the year that I left government, the outgoing government was in power, things changed immediately. We had an eruption of violence like the kind we didn't have when was it? The last time was 2008, a year before I returned to office. So what I'm saying is my policy is one of stability, peace, prosperity, and security for Israelis and Palestinians alike. And I think that that record not only speaks for itself, it also speaks for the future. I will govern and I will lead and I will navigate this government. The other parties are joining me. I'm not joining them. Remember, Likud is one half of this coalition. The other parties are, some of them are one fourth, one fifth the size of the Likud. They're joining us. They will follow my policy. Well, first of all, a lot of them have also changed and moderated their views, principally because with responsibility, with the assumption of power comes responsibility, and as you approach power, you become more responsible. But again, here's my record. I have led successive governments, some of them with parties to my right, and during those years, I actually invested in the Arab communities in Israel uh, more than any of the previous governments combined. Investments where investment should go in education, in infrastructure, in transportation, in the quality of life, in governance, because there are, a lot of them were complaining about the eruption of crime that makes their life hell. So I've invested in that too. I opened 11 police stations in Arab communities in Israel in that decade between 2010 and 2020 at the request of the Arab community. You know how many we had before? One. So I, I increased it by tenfold, both for security, for the ability for youngsters. I want every young Arab boy or Arab girl in Israel to have the same opportunities to partake in the remarkable success story that is Israel. And therefore, I've encouraged that and will continue to encourage that. Well, I think he keeps on saying that, but in fact, the reason we've not had an Israeli-Palestinian peace is because the Palestinians have refused to do, uh, and I think tragically, their leadership for the last century has refused to do what is finally happening in the rest of the Arab world, and that is to recognize that the state of Israel is here to stay. I think coming to a solution with the Palestinians will require out of the box thinking, it will require new thinking. The reason we got the historic Abraham Accords is that we got out of this mode that seems to me Mahmoud Abbas wants to stay in, and that is to to mouth the same lines, to go through the same rabbit's hole, not to seek new ways. In fact, it's when we started thinking about things in a new way that we broke the cycle of paralysis of peace that that paralyzes for a quarter of a century. Now, I think paradoxically, I don't think it's paradoxical, but people do, other people do, that as we expand the number of countries that make peace with us, it actually helps bring about at the end a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian problem. Everybody said, no, first you have to solve the Palestinian problem, otherwise you won't get peace with the Arab world. I said it may be the other way around. It may be that as you expand the peace with the Arab states, you'll be able to actually get to the peace with the Palestinians, and I firmly believe that. But I will say this: I think we face a possibility of not merely an expansion of the peace. I think we can have a new peace initiative that will form a quantum leap for the achievement, for the resolution of both the Arab-Israeli conflict and ultimately the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And of course, I'm referring to what could be a truly remarkable historic peace with Saudi Arabia. Mind you, I'm committed to deepening and strengthening the remarkable Abraham Accords that we've had with our neighbors. But I think the peace with Saudi Arabia will serve two purposes. It will be a quantum leap for an overall peace between Israel and the Arab world. It will change our region in ways that are unimaginable. And I think it will facilitate, ultimately, a Palestinian-Israeli peace. I believe in that. I intend to pursue it. Of course, it's up to the leadership of Saudi Arabia if they want to partake in this effort. I certainly hope they would. Look, there have been many ideas. I think the last initiative of President Trump actually put forth very innovative ideas that could help achieve or end the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. Uh, I think we can end the Arab-Israeli conflict and achieve peace with the Palestinians. We just have to be creative about it, and we have to not dig in our heels, because if you dig in your heels, you're stuck in the old groove. I think part of the remarkable thing that has happened in the last few years with the Abraham Accords showed that if we get out of this groove, then amazing things can happen. And I think amazing things can happen not only for Israelis and Arabs, but for Israelis and Palestinian Arabs as well. I look forward to having the opportunity to discuss this with the Arab leaders and with the Palestinians themselves. Well, first of all, I have taken concrete steps under my administration. This is contrary to the public image. For example, it was under my government, not the previous left-led governments, that we reduced dramatically the number of security checkpoints, that we increased the number of passages that enable 150,000 Palestinians from the territories to come and work every day in Israel. I never shut that down, even during periods of tension and terror. I said, no, they have to be able to earn a living, be able to care for their families, be able to move around. But I never said, and I've encouraged always investments, joint ventures, high tech between Israeli entrepreneurs and Palestinian entrepreneurs, the building of a Palestinian city, Rawabi, and other things. These are practical things that I say, but I'm not here to tell you that an economic peace is a substitute for a political peace. I believe that the reason we've not had a political peace, we couldn't move forward, is because the Palestinian leadership still refuses to accept the right of the state of Israel to exist. That remains the problem. You know, if you keep looking at other places, you're not going to find a solution to it. I hope that that will change. I think that the growing circle of peace between Israel and Arab states and the quantum leap that we could have in a peace with Saudi Arabia will also convince the Palestinians, to the Palestinian leadership, because I think quite a few of the Palestinian people already are there, to adopt a different attitude towards accepting the state of Israel. And once that happens, then many things can happen. But I don't want to straitjacket anyone and say, you know, you have to accept this, you have to accept that right now. I think we should move forward creatively. We should have talks about it. Look, the Arab Peace Initiative of early, what was it, I think 2002, was an indication that there is a willingness in those days to think about how to get out of the straitjacket and to get to a comprehensive peace. I think things have changed, things have moved, but the need to have this kind of new thinking is important. And again, if we stick to the old grooves, we'll be stuck in the old groove. If we think about new ways, then I think the sky's the limit. And I mean it. It's limitless, actually. Well, I think it's an indication of a desire to end the conflict in all its terms. But I think 20 years later, you know, we need to have a fresh view. And I'm not going to say what it is. I think we need to talk about it. But if there's a willingness to talk, maybe by the way, talk discreetly. You know, I'm sort of a champion of a slight twist in what Woodrow Wilson said in the Versailles Peace Conference. He said he believed in open covenants openly arrived at. I believe in open covenants secretly arrived at or discreetly arrived at. Yeah, we will have to have discussions about all the questions that you asked today and see how we can advance this. If you try to sort it out in advance, you get stuck. That's what happens. People, you know, how we say it in Israel, climb the tree. Everybody climbs on their own tree and says, I'm here and I'm not climbing down. And no matter how many ladders you give me, I'm stuck in my tree. The other guy's stuck in his tree. And we just shout at each other across tree trunks. And we never get to a meeting of the minds or an actual meeting on the ground. I think we have to take a different position. All these things need to be discussed discreetly, responsibly, and within the confines of closed meetings openly. And once we get an agreement, then we can come out. I don't need the public, you know, the public fanfare. I don't need it. You know, if you come to an agreement, it'll be publicized. If you don't come to an agreement, nothing happens. I think we can come to amazing agreements. Yeah, I think it contravened the longstanding tradition of bringing agreements that change Israel's territorial claims or territorial possessions or even economic claims. You'd bring it to the Knesset. I brought the Abraham Accords to the Knesset. By the way, I didn't have to, but I thought it was right on such an important matter to have our parliament decide on it. And I think they should have done it here too. I said that I'll look into it, but that I'll find ways, if there are bad things in it or incorrect things in it or harmful things in it, to correct it in a responsible way. I don't go up necessarily tearing documents up, and I don't think that's going to be the case. I'll do what I can to protect Israeli economic and security interests within the policy that I talk about, and I think I've shown that I know how to do that responsibly, without adventurism and without wild statements. I'm too experienced for that. Well, it's been signed. I mean, it hasn't been approved, but it's been signed. You mean other agreements? I don't know. I'll look into it. Look, my concern is that the revenues that come out of the sea, that I think were heavily favored Lebanon, do not favor Lebanon. They favor Hezbollah. And Hezbollah has not been a force for peace. And so you may just be funding Hezbollah's military arsenal that could be used not only against Israel, but against many others in the Middle East. You have to think about that very carefully, but that is already done. And as I said, I'll see what I can do to moderate or to any damage, or to secure Israel's economic and security interests. But as far as new agreements, well, this time we'll be negotiating it. And I'm a fair but tough negotiator, and we'll see. We'll see what is brought before us. I don't rule out things, but I always negotiate based on what I believe is Israel's interest. I don't only look at Israel's interest, because any negotiation always involves the other side. But the first thing that I look at is Israel's security going to be hurt? Are Israel's national interests going to be impeded? And within these parameters, we can proceed. We'll see. I don't want to commit before I know what they're suggesting. I think there is continual negotiations on it. There have been border adjustments, by the way, on both sides over the years. They've been tactical, and I don't think there's a major claim for a major shift. Not a serious one. It's been a border that is, its stability was not, the instability on the Lebanese-Israeli border was not based on this or that claim that the border has to move a kilometer here or a kilometer there. The instability was that this border was taken over on the Lebanese side by Hezbollah, that calls for the eradication of Israel, flooded South Lebanon with tens of thousands of rockets, that 10,000 of which were fired into Israel. That's what's causing the instability. And Hezbollah doesn't say, well, we're doing all this because we think we should have 500 more meters in this or that part of the border. They say, we're doing all this because Israel shouldn't exist. That's the problem. So it's not, I don't know what is being told in the Arab world, but that's the reality. Hezbollah is a force against peace, a force against stability, a force against the existence of my country, and in my opinion, a force backed by Iran against the security and stability of many countries. And that's what we've had to deal with on the Lebanese border. It's not I wish it were. I wish we had a real border dispute between us and Lebanon. If there are any such disputes, they're trivial and minor compared to the real problem which I've just discussed. I think the agreements that we make with like-minded states, traditional allies of the United States, and now I think sharing common interests to block Iranian aggression, these are powerful agreements, and they actually have substance to them, and they have weight. You could see that they cause immediately the flourishing of economic relations. Right now, after the Abraham Accords, we have billions of dollars uh, shaping up every year in joint ventures. We have people-to-people meetings, hundreds of thousands of Israelis visiting the Gulf states, Gulf state citizens visiting Israel. It's amazing. These are solid. Why is that? Because there is a meeting of the minds. We both recognize each other's existence, each other's right to exist, the benefits that accrue to our population from cooperation, and the desire to have our peoples move into the future with progress, with prosperity, and with security. It really is miraculous. That's what we can do with the countries that share our vision of a truly new Middle East. The problem with Iran and its proxies is that they have a completely different vision. They want to stop this progress. They want to dominate the Middle East, if not conquer it outright. They openly say they want to annihilate Israel. So, there is obviously, you may have a tactical agreement on the Lebanese maritime question, but you can't really make it. What kind of an agreement would I make with Iran? The method of our decapitation, how we commit suicide, how we allow them to have a nuclear arsenal that will threaten all of us. That's not an agreement, So yes, I think there's a quantum, an enormous difference between the solid agreements between like-minded states and the so-called agreements with Iran and its proxies that are usually violated even before they're signed. Look, there are ceasefire agreements between rivals and enemies, and some they hold as long as the common interest to hold them keeps on. But that's different from peace. That you should really draw a distinction between. I draw a distinction between tactical agreements or ceasefire agreements or agreements that temporarily or in a limited fashion serve otherwise warring parties, and the establishment of broad peace agreement. That's so different. Can we have a peace agreement with Iran? No, because Iran says there shouldn't be an Israel. They also say, maybe not as forcefully publicly, but they also say you shouldn't have many of the other countries in the Middle East. They should be subjugated as basically as Iran's minions. And sometimes they talk about, they use their proxies in Syria, they use their proxies in Yemen, they use their proxies in Lebanon to effect such a policy, not merely against Israel, but against other Arab countries. So, who cares what they say? Look at what they do. Who cares what they sign? Doesn't mean anything. They sign and they violate. They cheat as fast as they sign. And you certainly shouldn't make agreements with them that are bad if they keep the agreement, which is what I think the JCPOA was. It was a horrible agreement because it allowed Iran, basically with international approval, to develop a nuclear, basically an atomic arsenal paved with gold, with hundreds of billions of dollars of sanction relief. Where does the sanction relief go? Does it go to building hospitals in Tehran and Iran cities? Does it go to solving the water problem there? It goes for the expansion of terrorism and aggression throughout the Middle East. So I'm very clear-eyed about that. By the way, I have to tell you, I think that beyond public statements, I think the leaders of most of the Arab countries, and certainly the leading Arab countries, are absolutely clear-eyed about this threat of Iranian aggression. And I, for one, do not fall into the trap of saying that if I sign an agreement with the Ayatollahs, they're going to keep it. They're going to violate it if they can. They'll keep it only if it allows them to advance towards a capability of much greater aggression in a very short time. Well, you're quite right. You're quite right. I have been a vocal critic of it. First of all, look at what is happening in Iran itself. The Iranian people are asking themselves, are they better off today than they were 40 years ago when the revolution took place? I just look at their GDP per capita. It's basically, a few $1,000. It hasn't moved. In Saudi Arabia, it more than doubled. In Israel, more than doubled. Okay, because we invest in our people, we invest in our citizens. But the Ayatollah regime is just advancing, just investing in radicalism, in terrorism, in aggression. So number one, the Iranian people are not well off, and the JCPOA would give hundreds of billions of dollars to this aggressive regime, which they will use again, not for the Iranian people, but for their aggressive plans to take over the Middle East and beyond that. So I think that's one criticism that I've had. The second, it doesn't stop Iran from pursuing a nuclear arsenal, because under the JCPOA, if it's resumed today, within 3 to 4 years, Iran would have unlimited enrichment, uranium enrichment capacity under an international approval, under a P5+1, the great powers that would approve it, thereby basically saying to Iran, all you have to do is postpone the manufacture of these bombs, these nuclear bombs, for 3 years, and you can be a nuclear threshold state with our approval. That's crazy. That's folly, the height of folly. But today I sense a change. That is, I sense a change not only in Israel, obviously, and in our region, but I sense a change in Washington. And I think given what has happened in Iran, given the extraordinary courage of the Iranian men and these extraordinary Iranian women, I think there's been a change. And a lot of people now across the board in many lands say, you really cannot go back to the JCPOA. And we have to do everything in our power to stop Iran from having a nuclear arsenal. And the answer to your question in one sentence, I'm committed to do whatever I can do to prevent Iran from having a nuclear arsenal. I naturally won't itemize that here, but that's a firm commitment that I've made to myself and to the people of Israel. Not aggression. I don't want to. I want to protect ourselves against Iran's aggression and against a regime that openly calls for the annihilation of my country. That's obvious. But the answer to your question is yes, with or without an agreement. I don't think anyone has an answer to that this question. It's a very important question. But I think that if you look at what is happening now, since 1979, nothing like this has happened. I mean, initially people thought it's like the Green Revolution, but it's not. It's stronger. Initially they said, well, it's only limited to the universities. No, it's not. It's stronger. They said it's only limited to a few urban areas. No, it's stronger. So something very significant is happening in Iran, and that reflects the weakness of the regime that, unlike, for example, Israel, or unlike Saudi Arabia and other countries, or the other Gulf states, they've not done anything for their people. I mean, why are the people protesting? They're protesting because they want basic life, Iran suffers from this unbelievable shortage of water. What have they done for it? Nothing. Well, you have to drink to live. You also have to buy food at a reasonable price to live. You have to have basic income to live. You have to have basic infrastructure to live. And Iran has done nothing on that. So I think that, ultimately, these pressures accumulate. And rather than adopt a policy of creative reform, which I think is happening, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they haven't done that. They haven't moved an inch. They haven't moved a nanometer. They're just stuck, and they don't care for their people. They don't work for their people. They work for a radical ideology that is bad for Iranians, bad for Arabs, bad for Israelis, bad for Americans, and everyone else in between. So I think that realization that has now crystallized across so many sectors of Iranian society, it creates a new situation. How far does it go? Does it bring about the collapse or fundamental change in the regime or the replacement of this regime? I think it's too early to say, but I think we have to recognize that something very important is happening. Well, I think President Obama, whom I respected but disagreed with, believed that Iran was the key to stabilizing the Middle East, and he thought that if he would make a deal with the Ayatollahs, it would pacify the entire Middle East. He believed that the JCPOA, which he signed, would change Iran's behavior in the Middle East. It would make Iran join the family of nations. I think it disregarded the ideological thrust of this radical regime, its plans of its raison d'etre, which is to dominate the Middle East and frankly dominate good portions of the world with awesome power. I think he didn't see that. So when the JCPOA was signed, we could see, I argued that Iran, I argued this in Congress in 2015, and I said, well, it won't bring Iran into the family of nations. It will let Iran, out of the tiger's cage to devour one nation after the other. And that's what happened. Well, did they pursue peace in Yemen? Did they pursue peace in Iraq? Did they pursue peace in Lebanon or in Gaza, where they have their proxies, and so many other places? Then the answer is, of course not. They did the exact opposite. So I think on this, we had a difference of view with President Obama, and I think everybody can judge who was right and who was wrong. I think that on this, many Arab leaders, uh, including Gulf leaders, and certainly the leadership of Saudi Arabia, see very clearly what the true nature of Iran's policies are, the true nature of its regime. Uh, now, I can also tell you that from day one, Iran also cheated on the nuclear accord. But I think it goes well beyond that. I think it's a question of how do you see the Middle East? I saw the Middle East not the right policy for all of us to pursue. First of all, the United States, not to seek an accommodation with such an aggressive regime in Tehran, but to bolster the traditional allies of America, beginning with Israel and Saudi Arabia, against Iranian aggression, and to develop our own societies, our own countries in every way, in security and in technology and in civilian life and so on. That was my vision. Now you ask, where is America's policy? Are they going to go back to the JCPOA and give Iran this free course paved with gold to a nuclear arsenal? Well, a year and a half ago, before the protests in Iran, I would say they were certainly trying to do that. But I think there's a rethinking in Washington. I don't think I'm quite convinced. I haven't had, obviously, talks yet with the administration, but I will soon. From the initial contacts that we have, I think there's a rethinking of that. And I'm glad there is, and I think it's important. I'd like that rethinking to go back to as I said, the reaffirmation of the traditional alliances in the Middle East. I think that's good. I think it's good for our countries, it's also good for America, and it's good for peace. No, it's not. And also, we did take a lot of actions, which I don't itemize, not in my recently published autobiography, except one, the raid that our people did on the Iran's secret atomic archive, and we brought back a lot of valuable information out of this archive. But I can tell you this: I think, and our chief of staff, former chief of staff, who's now a political opponent of mine, said during the recent elections, he said, because of the actions that Israeli government under me took, we set back the Iranian program 7 to 10 years. Did we stop it? No. But can we stop it militarily? And in other ways, the answer is, I believe, yes. And we're certainly not going to let them just plunge ahead. Now, if you ask, how can you stop such a program? I won't go into operational or technical details, but I will say that unless you're able to have a credible military option against rogue states that are trying to arm themselves with nuclear weapons, you won't stop them. We stopped Saddam Hussein from developing nuclear weapons with a credible military action. We stopped Syria from developing nuclear weapons with a credible military action. The United States stopped Gaddafi's Libya from developing nuclear weapons with a credible threat of military action. North Korea, who had signed all the agreements you want, the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, they were signatories to it for 17 years. That didn't mean anything. There was no credible military threat, and therefore they're now a nuclear power, and half of Asia is quaking with fear. Iran has been stopped or delayed by actions that, again, I won't detail. But if you're not committed to taking the necessary action against Iran, then they will have a nuclear arsenal with deadly consequences for all of us and horrible consequences for their own people. I think the answer, I don't think, I know the answer to your question is we have the means and we have the will, and if necessary, we'll do whatever is necessary to stop Iran from having a nuclear arsenal. Absolutely. The actions that we took were without the actions we took so far, and I'm not saying which ones we did without the United States. We didn't do that with U.S. approval because the U.S. probably would disapprove. I mean, they were for many years going on the other assumption that they have to broker or reach a deal with Iran. And if we told them what it is, every operation that we were about to take, they would either say we oppose it, in which case would be in a direct conflict. Why do that? Just make your move. And secondly, it might leak. And if it leaks in the Washington Post and the New York Times, then the Iranians would have forewarning and our action would be nullified in advance. So we've taken a lot of steps. We took a lot of made a lot of operations that have rolled back Iran. But did we stop it? No. Are we committed to stopping it from achieving their goals? Yes. We'll do everything in my power to achieve that goal. Well, the recent supply of Iranian killer drones to Russia and that are being used in the war of Ukraine is disturbing for two reasons. One, the human costs involved, and two, this partnership that is troubling. I can tell you that our relationship with Russia obviously involved Iran, but paradoxically involved in a different way, because Iran was trying to use Syria, our northern border, as a staging ground for another Hezbollah-like front to open against Israel. And they wanted to bring in a proxy army of about 80,000 people commanded by Iranian generals stock it with missiles and other deadly weapons to be used against Israel. My policy was to prevent that. And we prevented it by, frankly, by taking air action, bombing these installations and these forces from the air. And of course, we were able to prevent that. But that requires continual effort. And that effort involves Israeli pilots flying in the skies of Lebanon, the skies of Syria, and they're in spitting distance from Russian pilots. Now, I remember when I was a young soldier, almost half a century ago, on the banks of the Suez Canal, we were shooting down Russian planes from the sky, and with their anti-ground, anti-air batteries, they shot down our planes from the sky. The last thing we want to do is have a military conflict between Russia and Israel. We don't want it. I'm sure the Russians didn't want it. So we actually, under my policy of actively preventing Iran from basing itself militarily in Syria, we reached an understanding with Russia that preserved Israel's freedom of action on this important front. I'd like to continue to have that, but I'm also aware of the fact that that we are being asked to supply defensive weapons to Ukraine. I was asked about that, and I said, "Look, I'll look into this question as soon as I get into office. I'm still not there. I'm still involved in the least pleasant activity of politics, which is coalition forming. I don't wish it on anyone, so I'm doing it right now. I'm actually taking a break right now and talking to you while this is happening. Once I form the government, God willing, I hope it'll happen in a few days. Then I'll sit down with our people, learn from our intelligence people what's happening, make a reasoned assessment, and then come back with an answer to your question." Not that I know. I disagree with that because I've heard these prognostications time and time again. First of all, about me, when I took office, I would be the warmonger, uh, uh, and of course the opposite has happened. My 10 years in the prime minister's office, more than any other prime minister in Israel, have brought the safest decades for Arabs and Israelis alike. Second, they said there'll never be any more peace treaties, and that happened as well. Then they said that when I challenged President Obama in Congress and the JCPOA, I've caused an irreparable rupture of support among Democrats for Israel. Well, Gallup has a tracking poll, and they measured the support among Republicans and Democrats, the American people as a whole, each year. They ask the same question, where does your sympathy lie with Israel and so on? Okay. And lo and behold, before the speech and after the speech, the difference is it went up by about 10%. It went up, didn't go down among Democrats, okay? And what you see over time is this, that support for Israel among Democrats is fairly high, but it's stable, It's about 50%, something like that. Support among the Republicans is skyrocketed. It's very high. So there's a myopia because you think the Democrats are abandoning Israel. They're not. It's just that the Republicans have moved to a very strong Israeli position. Across the American political spectrum, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, there is very strong and consistent support for the state of Israel. This is not true of a part of the Democratic Party that has moved sharply to the left, and it's moved in some cases to a radical position, and often against the wishes of a broad constituency in the public. And I think that adjusts itself because, I think people want to seize the center in every, in every political movement, no matter how polarized it is. Ultimately, you govern by seeking to get the bulk of the people behind you. So I don't think that basic attitude towards Israel is going to change. It's changing among the chattering classes. It's changing on the campuses. I don't deny that. But I think that in many ways, it's a lot firmer and a lot more stable across the American public, both Democrats, independents, and Republicans and independents alike. It's more stable. But this is not the first time that op-eds in the New York Times have been wrong.
You
I
are
disagree.
still stuck.
I disagree.
You are.
Well, first of all, our relations with Jordan are critically important, and I think the stability, prosperity, and security of Jordan is an Israeli interest. We may have our disagreements periodically. That happens even in the best of families. But I think the importance, the integrity of Jordan is important. And for example, Hezbollah and Iran try to topple that regime periodically and bring in hostile forces. So as far as General de Gaulle had a relatively easy problem. You know what? Because Algeria was not 5 meters from Paris. But this leads to my answer to you. I think to have a solution, you have to be realistic about its nature. And I think people have not been realistic about its nature. And here's the principle that would guide me. I would say the Palestinians should have, in a final settlement, all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten the survival and existence of the state of Israel. And this requires a balance. It's not an either or proposition. It's not 0 or 1. There's a balance in there. So far, we've not been able to get beyond first base because the Palestinians says, we don't think, I don't think they say it publicly to you maybe, but I've seen it, I've seen it public and I've seen it private. They really have to shake off the fantasy that Israel will disappear, that somehow, we'll make a tactical agreement with Israel, get the high ground over Tel Aviv, and eventually drive the Israelis. That's a big assumption. Yeah, there are a few. Well, take a look, for example, at the peace initiative of President Trump. It's not that I didn't have reservations of it. I did. It's not that I didn't expect the Palestinians to have reservations about it as well. I did that too. But I think it offers interesting solutions to how do you have this coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians in such a tiny area, between the river and the sea. And it actually has some interesting new ideas, like looking at transportational continuity instead of territorial continuity, things of that nature. I won't go into that. You can look at it. I don't think people have actually read it, but are there possibilities for ending this conflict? I think there are, but realistically, I think that the Palestinians will come around to genuinely making their peace with the existence of an Israeli state as we go to as we add other countries, and the most important country in the Arab world we make a quantum leap that will, I think, solidify peace and we'll sort of convince people, hey, it's over. Israel's here to stay. Now let's make our peace with it. I really couldn't say. I mean, I think I've been, there's a rule in Israel that follows a rule in the United States. Over there, they say one president at a time. In Israel, it's one prime minister at a time. So I'll be briefed on this question. But in general, I'd say that without the scaffolding of Iranian support, militarily, political, financial, the whole structure of Hezbollah collapses. There is no Hezbollah rule in Lebanon, and that's who's ruling Lebanon, Hezbollah. Let's be open about that. But without Iranian support, they'd collapse overnight. And the same is true of Iran's other proxies. They need Iran's support. How we prevent that, the smuggling of weapons to Hezbollah, or for that matter, to Hamas, well, there are many ways to do it. There are many ways in which my governments did it, but I can't tell you what has happened in recent months. I'll be able to at least know that within a few weeks, I hope, once I form the government.